Oftentimes, people will say, well, how can you be a Christian when the Bible is so oppressive? I usually respond like, what do you mean? Are there passages that you have in mind that are oppressive? And usually there isn't a response, but I imagine that a few verses from Exodus chapter 21 are probably in some minds. And as I was reading it today, I had remembered when I read it for the first time and the questions I had as it talks about slavery and women. How are we to understand these things? So I reached out to one of my closest friends, and we were talking today, and I said, hey, would you help me out? Could I interview you on these parts, particularly Exodus 21 today? So he very graciously volunteered to join me here. So, hey, David, thanks for helping us out.
Hey, Patrick. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So it starts out right away, Exodus 21, 1 through 7. And before even going to this, two things. There's quite a lot here that, even on the surface, is just really beautiful, especially in Exodus 22, 23. Um, but there's a lot, and this is more what we're focused on today, that are kind of cringy at first read. And sometimes we call these passages problem passages. That's really not fair. They create problems to a lot of modern readers, myself included, I think. But we have to do the work in understanding what was the purpose of these particular laws in their original context, and then saying, well, what principles do they have on us today? So today I want to talk about legalized slavery in the Bible. I want to talk about how it can seem like women are treated like property. And then lastly, how do we apply these laws as Christians? So let's start at the slavery question, David. So someone's reading this and they're saying, legal slavery? What? How how do we think about this? I remember the first time I read it. It's like, yes, God frees the slaves. 10 Commandments, and then laws about slavery. I'm like, what? So help us understand this, David.
Yeah, I think I I know for me, and as I've talked about this in seminary classes, like one of the huge hurdles for us as Americans is our like just tragic and ungodly and terrible history of slavery in America. That we have to like that is a huge when we read and hear the word slave, I know for me that's all I can think of is the Atlantic slave trade, and then how African Americans were treated in the South, not only when slavery was legal in America, but like afterwards of when they were then like switched basically the laws to where you know to where they then started imprisoning people and doing like work for hire, or like enslaving them into like working for the iron mill, and like that's all I can think of. And so I think you have to acknowledge that like that is often like the lens which we hear and see the word slave, and you have to be able to acknowledge it and give dignity to it, because it's a terrible thing that has happened and that is still happening in different regards with the prison system in America. But like, um, and then you'd have to take a step back and say, okay, this was written about a people not simply 1,000 years ago or 2,000 or even 3,000, but like 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. Like this was a different time period, and and they are not talking about the Atlantic slave trade here, or they're not talking about how plantation owners treated black slaves in the South. Like that just isn't what's being talked about here. It's not even the same country. Like it's over in the Middle East 3,500 years ago. And so it's a really, but I want to acknowledge that's a really hard thing to do because slavery is so, I don't know, it's just like, it's, you know? So I think you got to say that. And also the other thing you got to think about is our system of laws in America works differently than how laws worked and operated in the ancient Near East. So in America, we write out and codify every single law and every single offense of what could happen. I mean, pretty much to an extent. Like, there's some leeway that they give to judges when they say, like, you could be fined up to $1,000 if you do such and such a thing.
Right.
So the judge could do less. But in the ancient Near East, looking at the surrounding culture that the Israelites existed in, they didn't write laws that way, mainly because they didn't have so many cultures interacting and engaging. What they had was basically a bunch of case studies, and you had to think and meditate about the law or these case studies to try to get at the principle behind it. So we have no evidence that there was at any point that there was a judge who said, like, I'm giving this sentence or making this judgment because of this law written here, and like codified in this book or something like that. Like that's not how it worked. Like here, lawyers are all looking at like past judgments that have been passed down, laws that have been written into the system. But back then, because it was a small knit community. I think about like when Moses was leading the people out of Israel, and you only had, I don't know, I mean, how many people you had it wasn't that many, maybe 6,000, 6 to 10,000, and you have that passage where he is deciding all the cases, so it's like he's not dealing. They didn't have. It wasn't like 40,000 people or something like that. Like, and so
I think aren't you a little? I think you're a little low on this, though.
What do you mean?
There were more Israelites than 6,000.
Probably, yeah.
I think a lot more.
Yeah, that can be one of the resources. Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's a whole thing about. Anyways, that's a whole different topic we can talk about at a different time. Anyways, but all that to say, so when you read laws in Old Testament, we often read it through the lens of like how American laws work, and that's not the case. You need to look at the laws of the Old Testament as if these are case studies, and that there's a principle behind it. So like, let's look at Exodus 21:2, where it says, when you buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years. Then in the 7th, he is to leave as a free man without paying anything. Okay, so what I mean by it's not like our laws is they didn't have to stick to this law. There's a principle behind it that the author is getting at, that he's trying to help his community, help them understand as a way to live. And often, like with Old Testament laws, it's about making sure that it's about protecting the rights of the oppressed, or like the minorities, and it's basically protecting the rights of everyone involved in situations. So like if you buy a Hebrew slave, could you serve someone for 5 years or 4 years? Like, does it have to be 6? Like, that's not how the law works. Like, this is just giving an example. Something specifically here is that a lot of these laws in Exodus 21 are all concerned about money. These are economic situations that they're putting forward to try to help people, so that someone isn't in debt the rest of their life. or someone isn't that's often like, so this first one, when you buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years. Then in the seventh, he is to leave as a free man without paying anything. So what that's saying is, and you got to think of this isn't like this isn't the Atlantic slave trade. This is like this is like Jacob going to work for his uncle
Mm-hmm.
for 6 or 7 years to pay off a dowry so that he can marry one of his daughters. That's what the situation is. It's like, hey, I'd like to buy these 2 oxen. I don't have the money. What if I work for you for 2 years? And what the
And
law
of course,
is.
you use the example in the Bible that creates a whole nother question to cultures who don't do dowry. So, but anyway,
Oh, that's yeah. Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah, we don't do that. But well, I say that because that will come up later when we're talking about how they talk about women.
Yep.
And so, yeah. So here, like, this law is protecting the Hebrew that enters into a work contract to pay off debt. So, like, let's say, I'm sure it's like what is it like in modern times? It's like the stupid those like creditors who charge an outrageous interest rate so that no one is able to like ever get out of debt.
Yeah.
It could be like, okay, yeah, you can work for me, but these are like, this is the cost of what it's going to be for your food and your housing, and like, I know you're trying to only pay off these 2 oxen, but like, and so it's like, so the law is there so that someone can't enter into a work contract and then spend the rest of his life working for this person they don't want to. It's saying like, look, this is the very maximum limit is going to be 6 years. In the seventh, no matter what he owes the person, he gets to go free. So it's looking out for the right of the worker. And that is more, if you think about like if you buy a Hebrew slave, if you think about more of terms of like you going to work for an uncle, or like if you are in a small town where everyone knows everyone, you're going to work for someone who everyone knows in the small town to help pay off a car or something like that. Like, that's the idea. And so you have to keep on thinking in economic situations. And so in verse 3, where it says if he arrives alone, then he is to leave alone, and that's just talking about his debt. So if he arrives alone, and then he can leave alone. If he arrives with a wife, his wife is to leave with him. So it's like they're already they came into to the debt to work it off together. That means they get to leave together. Now it says, if his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children belong to her master, and the man must leave alone. All that is talking about is the economic situation still. It's saying if the man comes in to pay off some debt, and then hey, you know why I've been working on cars to pay off my car, I couldn't help but meet your daughter Susie, and
she's paying off a car.
No, he's paying off his car.
Yeah, but what's he doing, or what's she doing there?
Okay, Susie's just the daughter of the man who hired, of the man who entered this work contract. So Susie, but this guy, Susie and him fall in love, let's say, and so now, when it says like, and so now, but because, and we have to bring up the dowry again, but because in that culture, the man was supposed to provide like a dowry for like the bride. He's a poor guy. He still, I don't know, he still doesn't like doesn't have that. And so it's a way to, like, in this case, when it's giving this example, this is protecting the master. This is protecting the master from getting ripped off by saying like, let's see, because like the master is fronting the cost of the dowry by giving him a wife, right? And so like either the wife has to pay it off, or else he could like enter into another work contract. But when it says and the man must leave alone, all that's saying is that like whatever the wife owes for however that works. I'm still confused about dowries myself, but like of who gets to pay what. But essentially it's saying like you don't get to bring her debt in along with the man's
Mhm.
because that was a separate contract. As
So
it,
so
but
let me
like, but here's the thing. At the end of the workday, he gets to go home to his wife and kids. They're probably living a couple houses down. Like,
yeah.
it's not like he's keeping them. Like, this is family here you're talking about,
So
or he's living in the same house with them.
let's think about this with let's say it's not a dowry. Can we do that? Like
Oh, sure.
um was she able to sell herself into slavery as a woman?
Yeah, yeah.
So she sells herself into slavery, um, and she's a slave for let's say 6 years, 7 years, and she's only in on her second year, and he's in on her fourth year.
Hmm.
When he is done, she
When he's
doesn't get to go with him. She needs to finish up her term. Is that what you're saying?
her debt doesn't get to go with
Doesn't
him.
get canceled out.
That's that's what
But
they're trying to explain here.
now, what about though in verse 5? And I hope you're seeing this if you're watching this. Um, Sometimes theology is difficult, and we don't want to always. You're kind of seeing a behind the scenes look at some of David and I's conversation, I guess,
Yeah.
and other friends and teachers and of ours. And so sometimes when people just show up and they're totally confident, and that's all you ever see them as when they're preaching, it can give off the wrong idea about Bible study and interpretation and understanding the text, and it can make you feel like you're less than. The reality is, interpreting the Bible can sometimes be difficult, and that's okay.
It can be really hard,
And it's
and
a
that is
wonderful
okay.
thing to be able to have access to this holy book and um, be able to interpret it. So I just want to encourage you, if you're watching this,
Yeah. Yeah.
Bible study is worth it. And so anyway, we are going to make this video super long, David, if we
I'm
don't
sorry. Okay, I'll try
keep
to speak.
going. So let me
I'll
ask you
try
a
to be
question. So
concise.
um, in verse 5 of 21, if the
Yep.
slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I do not want to leave as a free man. His master is to bring him to the judges and then bring him to the door or doorpost. His master will pierce his ear with an awl, and he will serve his master for life. So what's going on there?
So then, so that's when the man, he's paid off his debt, but he says, "Hey, I really like working for you. I really like the work that we do. I like our relationship. Basically, um, I don't want to go and have to like try to find work somewhere else. Like the money and the wages that you pay me are good. I want to stay and continue to work, work for you, essentially.
So,
Where before he would have to go out and maybe like
yeah,
make his and find a different job
right.
to raise some money to like support him. Like, think about, um, yeah, I don't know. So
Well, I think the question that comes up in a lot of people's minds when they first read this is, that's a way of saying I'm asking for a friend, if the master declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I don't want to leave. Is that saying that if he leaves, he won't have his family anymore?
no, it's not saying
So
that.
explain that.
It's I do not want to leave as a free man. I would. It's still you still got to think about like this is all about his debt. This is
Mhm.
all about debt that people have and contracts they enter into to pay off debt.
Mhm.
So, um, if he left as a free man, he would still be married to his wife, and they would still be his children. But he wouldn't be in a working arrangement with the father of that wife, the father of the wife, and the grandpa of those grand of those children, the grandpa of those children. of his children. They would still be married. Like this doesn't it's not talking about a relational, social marriage relationship or anything like that. This is
Mhm.
all this is all just talking about money, and and this is basically protecting the guy um, who who does like pay off his debt, to say like, hey, you don't have to just because like you married the the daughter, or maybe another servant that entered into a work contract with this guy, you don't have to continue to working here if you don't want to. Like after your debt's paid off, you can go choose to work wherever you want.
Mhm.
It's not keep, but again, like he still got to go home to his wife and his kids, and it's when it says like,
So it makes it sound like, on a surface level reading, that the the wife, the woman, and the children are the property the of the master, right?
yeah,
And that the only way the man can keep his family with him is to keep that relationship with the master. And you're saying that is not what's happening here.
yeah, it's not what's happening here. Um, like they are his property in the sense that she owes him money
Mhm.
in that sense. Like I even think one of the ways to translate, um, you had it in Exodus 21:20 through 21. Uh,
Yeah, that's.
where it's
I'll read it. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Exodus chapter 21, verses 20 and 21 say, when a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod, and the slave dies under his abuse, the owner must be punished. However, if the slave can stand up after a day or two, the owner should not be punished, because he is his owner's property.
okay. So
So
that word,
explain that for me,
so
David.
that yeah, um,
I mean, it's really hard not to think about our country's history with slavery when you hear that, because he is his property. And
yeah.
it's like, what?
No, that's absolute no. You hit the nail on the head. It's so hard to think of it in a context outside of our own, because of how much trauma that's impacted and still impacts our society today. Like it's so hard. Um, Let me read this. This is from the NET Bible. Some of the translator note. It says regarding that clause, for he is his property. It says this last clause is a free paraphrase of the Hebrew for he is his money, as the King James Version and ASV state, or NASB his property. Um, and so I just thought that was interesting. Like that's the
Huh.
way they translated it in an earlier time in English. They would have understood like, for he is his money, like he is his.
Mhm.
That I don't know, that I found that a lot more. I found using the word money there to say for he is his money instead of for he is his property, it takes away some of the word and the weight that's attached to that word within our society regarding slavery and property. When it's more um, like people can't in our day and age, like it's not okay to punish someone in a business setting by like physically assaulting them. Um,
It's frowned upon.
it's frowned upon. It's illegal, and so I guess back then it wasn't. But it's kind of the idea of like, look, if you have someone who is, uh, if you like, if you have someone who's cleaning out your barn every day, and you are dumb enough to go and like injure one of their legs, like that's that's your own loss. That's your own fault. Like it, and they recover. Like that's on you. Like, and it's also protecting the. And even though like tragically, if the person dies, where it says so that they die as a result of the blow. Well, then that's murder. That
Yeah.
owner, whoever that person is going to he's going to be surely punished. But if it's not, if it just meant to discipline him, and that was a harsher time back then he's out whatever that person would have productively like brought to that. And you see other places in a little further on, if you keep on writing, like, and you're like, well, what about the servant? Like, what if he's injured really badly? But if you look down in verse 26, it like kind of knows that you're thinking about like, okay, that kind of is talking about the master there, but what about the servant? And it says, if a man strikes the eye of his male servant or his female servant so that he destroys it, he will let the servant go free as compensation for the eye, which is extraordinary. It's like, let's say you have this 6-year contract to pay off these number of oxen, and the master gets angry and hits you in the eye, and you're out an eye. Well, guess what? Now you get to walk away completely
Right.
from all your debt.
Right. Well, I mean, it's yeah.
And you might say, and again, this is where you have to think of like, this is a case study. So it's like, well, I didn't hit him in the eye, I hit him in the ear, and the text doesn't say anything about ears, so therefore I'm good. Nope, it doesn't work that way, because that's not the way they read the law. That's how we read the law, that says if it's not written down, I can get away with it. Here it's just saying, no, the principle behind it is, listen, if you were like injuring your worker in a way where you injure him, like, he gets to walk away free.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, what were you going to say, Patrick?
Well, that law right there recognizes that the person who is a slave is a person, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is owed something for that injury. Yeah, I mean, it's basically like suing your employer. Is that fair to say? I mean, it's different, but like if you lose an eye on the job, you're gonna sue, and you'll probably win, right?
And also another thing to consider too, when you read these, a lot of times they use like extreme examples to make a point. But that doesn't mean that's how the conditions were of people working. Like, the best example comparison I could think of is if you were to go read a human resources manual of like of a major Fortune 500 company, and you're reading in there like, if there's any harassment, sexual harassment, if there's any like physical altercations, if you're reading that and you're like, wow, that place is really, man, it's really going on there all the time.
Right.
Like, we understand that it being like, no, obviously, like, this stuff rarely happens. People aren't punching one another and calling each other terrible names in the office space.
Right.
Same thing here. Like, when they're giving these examples, people aren't striking their people aren't striking the people who are working for them so that they're like possibly potentially dying or like taking out eyes. That's like, think of it in that way. Like, these are extreme
if
examples.
and when it happens.
Yes, yeah. Like,
Here's
and if it's as terrible as this case study that we're presenting, this is what would happen because of the principle behind it. And one of the principles I think you mentioned is like, the worker's a person,
right,
with full humanity, like image bearer.
I want to make sure we don't ignore. We touched on it a little bit, but I just want to make sure that we fully, as much as we can, we fully address. Does the Bible view women as property? Okay. Easy answer. No. But does Exodus 21 and 22 view women as property?
It views women it views anyone that they belong to someone else as much as they owe them money. Does that make sense? Like in Proverbs, when it
Yeah.
says, like, in that sense, they're owned by that person.
Yeah.
In the same way today, we're like, a credit card company owns you if you owe them $20,000.
Right.
Are you their property? No. We're back then, were they their property that you could just toss around like a chair or like it's an inanimate object? No, not at all. But were they property in the sense that like they owed them money and therefore belonged in that in that sense?
So let's look at a specific example here. Exodus chapter 22, verses 16 and 17. I'll read it in the CSB, Christian Standard Bible. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and he sleeps with her, he must certainly pay the bridal price for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must pay an amount in silver equal to the bridal price for virgins. So she has sex.
They both have sex together.
They both, yeah, right. That's right. Okay, true. And he must pay the bridal price, so the dowry, for her to be his wife. Okay, that's first. But then if her father refuses to give her to him, he must pay an amount in silver equal to the dowry. So I think what the tough thing there is this father, if the father refuses to give her to him. So
tell me what you're thinking.
Well, I mean, is she the property of her father, and then once she gets married becomes the property of her husband?
No, but she's definitely under the protection of her father.
So talk about that.
Simply because of their culture back then. Not only of just how the culture, it was a patriarchal society. Fathers were not only, here's the thing, fathers were not only fathers of their household, but the fathers of the society were the leaders of that community. Like, that's the only people they had to, and I'm going to put quotes around this, but like the only type of leaders that they had were their elders, like were fathers, and mothers too. And you see that in different spaces in scripture where you get to see like women stepping up and taking leadership roles and things like that. But in terms of like how their society functioned, it was a family unit, and so it wasn't common like today where people could live as single people. You were a part of some like family unit, whether you were working for that family unit or whether you were marrying that family unit. And the other thing to think about too was that a lot of like the descendants and like how land was split up was dependent on who married whom, and like the land would go with the women as well. And so there's that. You have to think about that was at stake. But essentially, like, until a woman was married, she would always remain under the protection of her father, so that she would always have a place to a roof over her head, food to eat, so that she wasn't cast out and had to resort to other means like prostitution to try to survive.
So,
and that was just the harsh reality of back then. There wasn't an option for like women to just go off on their own and live independently.
So when first level reading, right? Reading this, So they have sex outside of marriage. Okay, they're not supposed to do that, but hey, they want to get married. They're two young kids in love. She goes to dad and says, "Dad, I've met the love of my life." And he says, "No way."
Yep.
That was happening?
Yep. Pretty much is like he
Really?
knows this. Yeah, he knows this guy, and he's like, okay, this guy is a bum. This guy isn't gonna like provide for you.
What if is dad a jerk though?
Maybe it could. Dad could be a jerk in this case. Maybe
Hmm.
yeah, maybe that's another way to look at it, I suppose.
Well, I've watched so many Disney movies, millennial, that I just assume dad's a jerk. Eh,
And I will say too, like this isn't I don't believe that this is talking about like rape or anything like that. I know there's other laws that they talk about um where it specifically is talking about like if a woman is raped, um and is like unable to defend herself, like she has protection under the law, under their system. Like there's principles that are trying to protect her and her rights as an image bearer of God. And here it's more like she went along with it, uh, as I don't know, as it wasn't like a forceful seduction. It was she let her, you can let yourself be seduced.
Sure. And
Um,
and for modern readers, maybe one of the difficulties is so we don't really have a high view of sex.
yeah,
So
that's
it's like,
true.
well, what's the big deal? We just
That's awesome. I forgot about that. Yeah, we do live in like the yeah, it's like a hookup culture, and
right.
people aren't really concerned about their descendants and the familial line, and property isn't really passed down through.
Well, and we're talking about white Western culture.
Yeah,
We talk about our culture too. So that's another thing. I mean, even saying, well, we don't do dowries. Well, who's we? I mean, there's people in my neighborhood who do dowries, and so
that's a
um,
great point, Patrick. Yeah,
isn't it?
that's my bad.
Well, no, I'm not trying to uh, correct you. I'm just saying it's we are interpreting and trying to understand and interpreting this book 3,500 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and I'm not saying it's a long time ago to say it's not God's word. It absolutely is. I'm saying it takes some work to interpret that because we have all of our cultural baggage, our neighbor's cultural baggage, our other neighbor's cultural baggage, right? And so we are reading this. Northside Neighborhood Church is a church reading Exodus. We are a particular church in a particular time of place with particular baggage and assumptions that we're bringing into the text, and this is one reason why theology is such difficult work, right? but
Yeah,
but it's worth it. And
it
so
is, and it's and one thing to point to, like really clearly in Scripture, to show like this is how they read the law is in Deuteronomy 25:4. There's this law that says, "You shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain."
yeah,
You think, "Oh, well, cool. Well,
yes,
I'm using a donkey, therefore I can muzzle it." And you think, "Well, no, that's not how the law works." But then Paul uses it two different times, this verse, and interprets it, and he gets at the principle. And one is like, "Hey, pay your laborers a fair wage." That's the principle he took from it. And another one was, "Hey, if you have pastors that are serving you and doing work for you, they deserve a wage as well." And so you have to realize Paul read this verse that was talking about an ox, and he
mm,
literally says like the law wasn't written for the ox, was it? No. Like
mm,
these laws were written for the people of God, and they were written for us as well.
yeah,
And so we can't go in it and just try to have this strict literal reading and saying, "Oh, well, I guess it doesn't apply in this case," or "We have to do it specifically like this." Like that's why you read in Psalms, it calls on Israel to meditate on the law of God day and night. because they you were trying to get behind it. Like, what are the principles that God really values in this? And to point specifically about women, I mean, we see in Scripture one of the first times the first time someone gets to give God like a personal name, it's a woman. It's Hagar,
Mm.
like a servant of Abraham, that she says like, you are the God who provide, or you are the God who sees. And you see a God again and again in women, like lift up women and show that they are valuable and full image bearers that deserve all of like the dignity and respect that any other image bearer deserves.
And then we run it, we get to these passages and we say, well, the Bible must be uh, just a dumb, irrelevant book, right? And we write it off and we say, well, look, because it says this and this, and that is
Yeah,
not the
it's a
picture that I would want anyone in my church
no,
to,
and I
to,
think I
to
think
get.
part of it, a good example to think about too when coming to like an ancient text like this, the Bible is like if you go to someone else's culture and enter their home,
Yes.
um, they probably do things a lot differently. And how rude would it be to come in and be like, well, why is that table so close to the ground? Why don't you have chairs? That's dumb. That's wrong. Like, you take your shoes off, like we leave them on. That's the way you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
Rather than and assume that everything is wrong with that culture and assuming that you have the right one. The same way with text, like when we come to a text and we don't understand it, rather than just try to cast judgment and say like, well, this is wrong, um, we should assume that like there's a reason for the things that they do, and we're probably in the wrong of our interpretation. Like the authors knew what they were doing, and um, so that's a helpful way I like to think of that. An example I've heard.
Hesitate to assume the writers were stupid.
Absolutely.
That's a very good Bible uh, reading principle. Be humble while you're reading it,
And it's okay. Like I'm still learning about a lot of this. I don't know a lot of this.
yeah,
Is I'm still trying to get behind the principles, and the funny thing is, we're still learning more and more about the ancient Near Eastern culture,
yes,
because there's all these tablets that people are translating that like give like paint a fuller picture of what the ancient Near East was like.
yeah.
And so, which is crazy. It's like the farther we get away, we're actually learning more
Mhm.
about what that was going on. But like I'm still learning, and there's lots of good books out, and I'll try to put some resources later.
Yeah.
Um,
You you send me those resources and then I'll put them as like the top comment on YouTube, and then when I post this on Facebook, I'll put that in the kind of a bibliography resource list in the comments as well. Well, before I imagine that people, if they've watched this entire thing and um, that people still have questions,
absolutely.
especially
I still have questions.
yeah. And I have your number, which is good because then I can call you. But the video can't last 3 hours. So to wrap up, I want to ask, how do we apply these laws as Christians? So if you're maybe reading the Bible for the first time, so we have brand new Christians who are reading Genesis and Exodus with us. That is so great. I could imagine being brand new to the faith. And then you're like, well, I have to, do this and this and this.
Sure.
Right? And then you're saying, well, then you're like, wait, what? So then I can commit adultery and I can murder,
Oh man.
So this is an easy question, but just give me, David, some principles
Sure.
for how we apply some of these laws as Christians today.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for the in Exodus 21, those first verses 2 through 4, like the principle that's being stated there is that we can actually apply to our lives is one, don't hold someone in perpetual debt. That is the Lord is not pleased with that.
Right.
You don't get to loan someone money and then make them have payments continually for the rest of their life. You don't. God doesn't like that of you keeping someone in perpetual debt to you. That's uncool. Also, then, like, basically keep debts separate. Like, and this protects the person who's lending the money. Like, it protects not only the person who's borrowing money, but like also lending it. Like, if you lend money to one person, like they don't get to bring, like, after that deal has been made, they don't get to like bring other stuff into that deal. Does that make sense? And like,
Yeah.
and act, and just because that you were the one who lent the money, like you don't get to take advantage of the money lender. That's also, God doesn't like that either. Like if you come into an agreement, what would that be like? It'd be like this. Let's say you talk to your neighbor and you ask, "Hey, can I borrow your lawnmower?" And he says, "Sure. Here's how to get into my garage. Go ahead and borrow it." And you go over, and while you're over there, you also see, "Oh wow, that's a really nice leaf blower, and that's a really nice leaf mulcher."
Yeah.
And instead of asking him if you could also, you just take it and assume like, well, he has all of this. I might as well be able to. He probably doesn't. I mean, depending on the relationship, but let's say this is like a newer relationship, like, and that hasn't ever been established. Don't take advantage of the person who's lending you something.
Yeah.
Don't just say like, well, you already were borrowing the lawnmower. I just assumed that it'd be like, no, that's not cool. Like, that's what this is talking about.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get to bring stuff in and think it's okay. And I know that might sound like silly, but who knows? Like, maybe he, people, when like we have stewardship of things, and when we lend things out, and we don't lend other things, we have reasons for it. And so it's kind of like, just because someone has stuff doesn't mean that, and you doesn't mean that you can just take it without asking, or that you can. I think that's like two things that. Yeah, and I think if you put yourself in the place of either of those, you could say like, oh, I can see how I feel respected in that situation, and that I'm being respected.
Yeah.
What else?
I mean, we could keep sharing examples, but the point is that there's a famous preacher named Andy Stanley, and he says, what do we need to do? He says we need to unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament. Is that what he said?
Yeah.
And this is kind of a popular idea. And when I was,
and you know what? If we read the Old Testament as if it's like an American 21st century law book, I would also unhitch myself from that.
Yeah. When I was 19, I was sort of identified in this movement called Red Letter Christianity, which basically says, well, some of those laws in Leviticus and Exodus, they're gross, and I'll just follow the stuff that Jesus says. And the reality is Jesus had a very high view of the Old Testament. And so, but then you see a more smaller view of people are saying, if we're going to be faithful to the Lord, we need to stone sorcerers, and we need to we need to bring back slavery and all of these things. You think, oh my goodness. So there's a lot of misunderstandings about how to read and apply the Old Testament out there. So no, that don't be crazy. Is that?
And also, I mean, when Jesus said, he summed up the entire law in
Yes.
this, like love the Lord your God, like be loyal to God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And this is like it. Be loyal to your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself.
Mhm.
Like if we're reading these laws and we think, well, this sounds mean and this doesn't sound very loving, we're
Mhm.
probably not understanding it correctly.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
all of these laws are the principle that overarches all of this is be loving and loyal to your neighbor.
Mhm.
Um, like, what would it look like to be loyal and loving to someone when you lend money, or
Mhm.
when you let them borrow things, or when someone comes to work for you? Like,
Mhm.
this is what rules over all of this.
Mhm.
Um, so,
And we understand these things. Like the Bible was given to you personally, sure, but the Bible was given to the Christian church, and so we understand these things within the context of one another. And that's one reason why I wanted to do this with David today, is so that you can actually kind of be a fly on the wall as we had a conversation that we'd usually have privately, and that this takes some work, and we do it together. The Bible is not a stupid, archaic book.
no,
The Bible is the book in which God has revealed himself. This is the book that I base my life on, and that Northside Neighborhood Church ought to base our existence on. And so, if you have any questions, comments, pushback, anything like that, reach out. Reach
yeah,
out to me.
and push back.
Yeah.
That's part of it. We're supposed to read the Bible in community,
Yes.
so we can dialogue and say, I don't think you're right, or this doesn't make sense, or yeah, push back, and we'll try to get the resources out there too, um, for you as well.
And keep going.
Yeah,
Keep
keep
going as
going.
we. I think we have less than 2 weeks left um, in Exodus, and so keep going. Keep reading. This is a worthy use of your time. So, David, thanks so much, man. I love you, bro.
I love you too, man. Thank you. Sorry that this was so long, everyone. But
See
yeah,
you.
double speed it. Play back at double speed.